The deep space monitoring station hummed quietly in the darkness beyond Earth's moon. Communications Officer Geo had been pulling double shifts for 3 weeks now, scanning the endless static for anything interesting. Most days brought nothing but automated cargo reports and diplomatic chatter between the various alien species scattered across the galaxy. Today was different. A signal burst through the background noise like a scream in the night. Jiu's coffee cup nearly slipped from her hand as the computers started going crazy, lights flashing everywhere. She'd never seen readings like this before. What the hell? She muttered, fingers dancing across her console. The signal was powerful, broadcasting on every emergency frequency at once. Someone was burning through massive amounts of energy just to make sure this message reached as far as possible. The translation software worked frantically to decode the alien language. Geo watched the words appear on her screen, and her blood went cold. This wasn't a routine transmission or some trade dispute. This was pure terror. She grabbed her communicator and ran toward Admiral Jimin's office, her boots echoing through the empty corridors. The Admiral was reviewing fleet reports. When she burst through his door without knocking, "Admiral Jimin, you need to hear this right now," she said, breathing hard from her sprint. Jimin looked up from his paperwork, seeing the panic in her eyes. In 5 years of working together, he'd never seen Geo lose her composure. "What is it?" "An emergency broadcast from the Kalari Confederation. The translation is rough, but listen to this." She played the recording, her hand shaking slightly. The alien voice came through the speakers, distorted by distance and desperation. Even through the translation software, Ambassador Villani's fear was unmistakable. "Ancient enemy returns. Our fleets are destroyed. ... Worlds burning. Any civilization receiving this transmission, please, we beg for help. ... Our children are dying." The message cut off abruptly, leaving the office in heavy silence. Admiral Jimin stood up slowly, his face hardening. He'd studied galactic history. He knew what happened when species sent out desperate calls for help. The usual response was a formal statement of concern, maybe some humanitarian aid if they were lucky. Everyone had their own problems to worry about. "Sir, I've been monitoring the galactic communication networks," Geo continued. "The Zentoran Empire sent their thoughts and prayers. The hegemony offered to help evacuate refugees to neutral systems. The Trade Federation is discussing economic sanctions against whoever's attacking them, and the others." Radio silence. Most species are pretending they never heard the message. Admiral Jimin walked to his window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was facing extinction, while the galaxy's powers offered empty words and half measures. "Get me a direct line to Fleet Command," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Sir, the Kalari asked for help. We're going to give it to them." He turned back to Geo, and she saw something in his eyes that made her step back. It wasn't anger exactly, but something harder and more dangerous. "Contact Admirals Sana and Wuyang. Full fleet mobilization within 6 hours. All 3 battle fleets, sir. That's every deep space vessel we have. Then it should be enough." The emergency sirens wailed through Earth's military headquarters as the Defense Council assembled in record time. Politicians, generals, and admirals filled the secure briefing room, many still in their pajamas or evening clothes. The holographic display showed the Kalari distress signal playing on repeat, each loop making the desperation more real. President Minyang slammed her hand on the table, silencing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation. An entire alien civilization is about to be wiped out, and they're asking for help." Secretary of Defense Jin Woo pulled up diplomatic reports on his tablet. "Ma'am, I'm seeing responses from across the galaxy." The Zentoran Empire issued a statement, calling it deeply concerning. "The hegemony is forming a committee to study the situation. The Trade Federation wants to send a fact-finding mission. How long for this fact-finding mission? Asked Admiral Jimin. 18 months, sir? Maybe longer, if they need to debate it. The room fell silent. 18 months. By then, there wouldn't be any Kaleri left to find. Admiral Jimin stood up, his voice cutting through the political chatter. They're dying out there right now, while everyone else is writing strongly worded letters. Entire worlds are burning. We can help them. General Taeyong frowned at his deployment screens. Admiral, you're talking about committing our entire deep space fleet. 3 full battle groups. That's 847 ships and 200,000 personnel. If we send everything to Kaleri space, Earth will be defenseless. Defenseless against what? Jimin shot back. Our neighbors are too busy forming committees to be a threat. Foreign. Minister Yunjin shook his head. The political ramifications could be enormous. We'll be seen as aggressive, militaristic. Other species already think humans are too quick to violence. Good, said Admiral Jimin flatly. Maybe they'll think twice before ignoring cries for help. President Minyang studied the faces around the room. Half looked terrified at the idea of committing everything to help strangers. The other half looked ashamed that they were even debating it. How long would it take to reach Kaleri space? She asked. Standard jump protocols, about 3 days. But if we push the engines hard, maybe 36 hours, replied Admiral Jimin. And if we do nothing, the Kaleri die. Whatever's attacking them grows stronger, and we get to live with the fact that we had the power to help and chose not to. The room erupted in arguments about protocols, international law, and proper channels. Admiral Jimin watched the politicians debate while people died, and something cold settled in his chest. President Minyang raised her hand for silence. The decision is made. Admiral Jimin, you have full authorization for Operation Rescue Shield. Deploy all available forces. Within minutes, orders flashed across military networks worldwide. Captain Sana was reviewing her night shift reports aboard the UES Defiant when her communicator buzzed with priority orders. Maximum burn to Kaleri space. Depart immediately. All diplomatic protocols suspended. She looked at the orders twice, then smiled grimly. Finally, a mission that made sense. All hands, battle stations. We're going to war. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Kaleri territory, and Commander Minho immediately knew they were looking at something beyond normal warfare. His tactical screens lit up with thousands of contacts, but these weren't ships in any sense he understood. What am I looking at here? He muttered, adjusting the display filters. Science. Officer Do-yoon worked frantically at her station, trying to make sense of the readings. Sir, I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system. Whatever's out there, it's consuming everything in its path. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the Kaleri system in horrifying detail. Where there should have been thriving worlds and space stations, twisted metal structures moved through space like living things. They weren't built. They had grown, spreading across the system like some kind of technological cancer. Admiral Jimin to the bridge. Commander Minho called over the intercom. Admiral Jimin arrived just as the first communication from the surviving Kaleri forces came through. The alien voice was barely a whisper, broken by static and what sounded like explosions in the background. Human ships, you must leave immediately. The Devourer has already consumed our outer worlds. Nothing can stop it, Devourer, asked Jimin. Do-yoon pulled up the translated files the Kaleri had sent, according to their historical records. It's an ancient machine intelligence that appeared in this galaxy over 1,000 years ago. They call it the Devourer Swarm because it literally eats entire civilizations. The tactical display updated, showing the true scope of what they faced. Millions of individual machine units worked together like a single organism, stripping metal from destroyed ships and incorporating it into new forms. Every battle made them stronger. How does it work exactly? Commander Minho asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. It converts matter directly to energy, then uses that energy to build more of itself. Every ship destroyed, every station consumed, every piece of technology it touches becomes part of the swarm. The Kaleri estimate, it's grown by 300% since the attacks began. Admiral Jimin studied the historical data, his face growing darker with each page. What's the usual response when species encounter this thing? Same pattern every time, sir. Initial resistance lasts about 4 to 6 hours, then complete retreat and abandonment of all territory in the affected systems. The surviving governments relocate to other sectors and hope the swarm doesn't follow. And does it sometimes? The records show at least 12 different civilizations that were completely wiped out over the past millennium. The lucky ones managed to evacuate maybe 10% of their population. The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. They weren't just facing an enemy, they were facing something that had perfected the art of extinction. Commander Minho looked at the tactical displays showing their 3 battle fleets against the massive swarm presence. Sir, the math doesn't look good. We're outnumbered about 10,000 to 1. Admiral Jimin walked to the view screen, watching the mechanical horrors consume what remained of Kaleri's civilization. Every other species in galactic history had looked at these odds and chosen retreat. The smart choice. The logical choice. Time to break the pattern, he said quietly. The engine rooms of the UES Defiant screamed with mechanical stress as Chief Engineer Wu Yang pushed every system past its breaking point. Warning lights flashed red throughout the engineering decks, and the entire ship vibrated like it might shake itself apart. Chief, the jump drives are already at 140% capacity, shouted Mechanic Cyajin over the roar of overloaded engines. If we pushed them any harder, we could blow the entire power core. Wu Yang wiped sweat from his forehead and checked the readings again. The Kaleri didn't have 3 days to wait for a proper approach. Every hour they delayed meant more alien civilians dying, while the Devourer swarm consumed their worlds. Then, we don't push harder, we get smarter, he said, pulling up the engine skim. Bypass the safety protocols on decks 7 through 12. Reroute power from life support to the secondary systems. Sir, that'll cut our oxygen reserves by 30%. Good thing this is going to be a short trip then. 3 decks up. Lieutenant Yeri had turned the weapons bay into organized chaos. Torpedo casings lay scattered across the floor while she and her team worked to modify every piece of ordnance aboard the ship. The data from Kaleri encounters showed that conventional weapons were useless against the swarm's adaptive technology. The problem is, their shields learn from each impact, she explained to her confused weapons team. First shot does full damage, second shot does half, third shot bounces off completely. Gunner's mate Changmin held up a modified torpedo. So what's the plan, Lieutenant? We make every shot different. Random detonation patterns, varying explosive yields, different approach vectors. If we can't use the same weapon twice, we'll make sure we never use the same weapon twice. Her team looked at the mountain of ordnance they'd have to modify in less than 30 hours. It was impossible work with impossible deadlines. Better get started then, said Changmin, reaching for his tools. Admiral Jimin walked through the ship's corridors, stopping to talk with crew members at every station. In the medical bay, doctors prepared for casualties they hoped wouldn't come. In the communications center, translators worked to understand Kaleri tactical language. In the fighter bays, pilots ran combat simulations against an enemy that had never been defeated. What struck him most was what nobody was talking about. In his 20 years of military service, Jimin had been part of dozens of mission briefings. There were always discussions about withdrawal routes, fallback positions, and exit strategies. Standard military doctrine demanded backup plans for when everything went wrong. Not this time. Nobody had even mentioned the possibility of retreat. The crew understood something fundamental about this mission that went beyond military tactics or strategic thinking. "Admiral," called out Navigation Officer Felix as Jimin passed the bridge, "I've been running calculations on our return journey. Should I plot a course back to Earth?" Jimin paused, considering the question. "Plot a course to the next swarm-occupied system instead." Felix looked confused. "Sir, if we're successful here, there will be other species that need help. If we're not successful, ... Jimin shrugged. "Then plotting a return course won't matter anyway." The bridge crew exchanged glances, then returned to their work with renewed focus. They were 36 hours from the impossible, and nobody was planning for failure. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, silence fell across every bridge in the Armada. What they saw defied everything they thought they knew about warfare. The Kalari home system looked like it had been fed through a giant meat grinder, where proud space stations had once orbited peacefully. Twisted metal sculptures drifted through space, like abstract art made from nightmares. But these weren't random debris. They moved with purpose, flowing and reshaping themselves as millions of geometric machines worked to consume everything in sight. "Navigator." Felix gripped his console, his knuckles white. "Holy mother of ... He started, then stopped, unable to find words for what filled their view screen. The Devourer swarm wasn't just an army, it was a living ecosystem of destruction. Massive harvester units, each the size of a city block, slowly dismantled the remains of Kalari battleships. Smaller scavenger machines swarmed over every piece of metal, like metallic vultures, breaking down molecular bonds and feeding the raw materials to builder units that immediately began constructing new weapons. "Sir, I'm reading over 12 million individual swarm units in this system alone," reported Sensor Officer Suyang, her voice barely steady. "And they're all connected. It's like watching a single organism with millions of bodies." Commander Minho studied his tactical display, watching red contacts multiply every second as more swarm units emerged from processing facilities built into what used to be moons. "How are they manufacturing so fast?" "They're using the mass from destroyed Kalari ships," explained Science Officer Dayun. "Every ton of metal they consume becomes 5 tons of new swarm units." The math is horrifying. At the center of this mechanical hell, a small cluster of surviving Kalari vessels formed a desperate defensive sphere around their home world. Their ships looked like ancient relics compared to the sleek, ever-changing forms of the swarm. Emergency broadcasts filled the communication channels with panicked alien voices. Evacuation ships compromised. Orbital defenses at 12%. Requesting immediate assistance from any forces in range. Admiral Jimin watched the destruction for several long moments, his jaw tightening. Every military instinct told him to order an immediate retreat. They were outnumbered by thousands to one, facing an enemy that grew stronger with every victory. Instead, he opened communications to the entire fleet. "All ships, battle formation, Alpha 7, we're going in." Then he switched to the general broadcast frequency, making sure every surviving Kalari would hear him. "Kalari Command, this is Admiral Jimin Park of the United Earth Defense Force. We received your distress call. We're here to help." The response came immediately. "Ambassador," Villani's voice cracking through subspace static. "Impossible. You actually came, but you must leave immediately. The Devourer cannot be stopped. Every species that has tried ... has retreated." Admiral Jimin finished calmly. "We noticed that in your historical records." A pause. "Admiral, you don't understand. Your ships will only feed the swarm. It will grow stronger from your sacrifice." Admiral Jimin looked out at the mechanical horror, consuming an entire civilization, and smiled grimly. "Ambassador, you don't understand humans. We didn't come here to feed it. Then why? We came here to kill it." The first human attack wing moved in with textbook precision, their plasma cannons charging for maximum impact. Captain Sana led 12 destroyers, in a coordinated strike against a cluster of swarm harvester units, expecting to punch through their defenses like they had against every other enemy humanity had faced. The first volley was perfect. Brilliant. Blue plasma beams tore through swarm shields, vaporizing 3 harvester units instantly. The bridge crews cheered as secondary explosions rippled through the enemy formation. Then everything went wrong. Second volley. Fire. Captain Sena ordered, but this time her plasma beams barely scratched the swarm shields. The third volley bounced off completely, as if the enemy had suddenly become immune to their weapons. "What the hell just happened?" demanded Commander Junho, from the destroyer Relentless. Science Officer Daehyun's voice crackled over the comm. "The swarm units are sharing data in real time. After the first plasma hit, every unit in the fleet adjusted its shield frequency to match. They've essentially become immune to our primary weapons." The situation got worse quickly. Human torpedo strikes that should have crippled swarm builders instead seemed to make them stronger. Energy weapons that worked perfectly in the first exchange became useless after minutes. Even their electronic warfare systems were turned against them as the swarm learned to mimic human communication protocols. "Admiral, we're seeing the same pattern across all engagement zones," reported Chief Tactician Hunjin, his voice tight with frustration. "First strike effectiveness, then rapid adaptation. Within 20 minutes, our weapons become completely ineffective." Captain Sana limped back to the main fleet with her wing shot to pieces. 2 destroyers lost, 4 heavily damaged, and they'd barely put a dent in the swarm forces. In the briefing room aboard the UES Defiant, the mood was grim. "I've been studying the historical records from other species," Hyunjin continued, pulling up tactical analyses on the main screen. "The pattern is always the same. Initial engagement lasts about 4 hours. Casualty rates climb exponentially as weapons become ineffective. Then complete retreat." "How did other species fight them?" asked Admiral Jimin. "Defensively, sir. Standard military doctrine. Establish defensive perimeters, minimize losses, protect high-value assets. The Zentarans built fortress stations. The hegemony used layered shield formations. The Veltari tried hit-and-run tactics, and they all lost." "Yes, sir." "The swarm adapted to every strategy within hours." Admiral Jimin stared at the tactical displays, showing swarm units continuing their methodical consumption of Kaleri infrastructure. Every destroyed ship, every consumed station, made the enemy stronger and smarter. "Sir, recommend we follow established protocols," suggested Captain Sena, carefully. "Withdraw to safe distance, reassess our options." "No." Admiral Jimin's voice was quiet, but firm. "Look at this data again. What do you see?" The officers studied the readouts, confusion written on their faces. "They're machines," Jimin continued. "Sophisticated ones, but still machines. They follow patterns, adapt according to programming, learn from repeated inputs." He looked up at his staff. "But what happens when you don't give them patterns to follow?" Understanding dawned on Hunjin's face. "You're talking about complete tactical chaos. I'm talking about being human." Admiral Jimin's battle plan looked like madness written on a computer screen. Instead of the organized formations that every military academy taught, he scattered his ships across dozens of attack vectors with no apparent coordination. To any outside observer, it looked like the humans had completely lost their minds. "All ships, execute pattern chaos," Jimin broadcasted to the fleet. "Remember, no tactics used twice, no patterns they can follow. Make it up as you go." Captain Chungbin, aboard the destroyer, Relentless stared at his orders in disbelief. "Sir, command wants us to what?" "Ram the command node at full speed," his tactical officer repeated. "Crew evacuation at the last possible second." "That's suicide." "No, that's Tuesday for humans apparently." Across the battlefield, human ships began doing things that violated every rule of space combat. The cruiser Defiance spun end over end, while firing weapons in random directions. creating a chaos field that the swarm couldn't predict. Fighter squadrons broke formation and attacked individually, each pilot making up their own tactics on the spot that the swarm's adaptive systems went haywire. They had been programmed to learn from patterns, to absorb enemy tactics, and counter them. But the humans weren't using tactics, they were using pure chaos. Lieutenant Yeri's modified nuclear mines detonated in spiraling geometric patterns that made no military sense but confused the swarm's targeting computers. Captain Sena's battle group split into single ships that attacked from impossible angles, some flying upside down, others spinning like tops, while firing everything they had. "Changbin, you're clear for the run," came the voice over the comm. "Evacuation pods ready." Captain Changbin looked at his crew, seeing the same crazy determination in every face. "You heard the man. All hands to evacuation pods. 30 seconds to impact." The Relentless screamed toward the massive swarm command node at ramming speed, her engines pushed beyond breaking point. At the last second, escape pods burst from her hull like seeds from a flower, carrying the crew to safety as their ship became a guided missile. The impact was spectacular. The command node, a structure the size of a space station, cracked open like an egg. Secondary explosions rippled through connected swarm units as their coordination network failed, from the safety of the surviving Kaleri vessels. Ambassador Vellani watched the human assault with growing amazement and horror. These weren't the careful, calculated battles he'd studied in military histories. This was something else entirely. "Commander, are you seeing this?" his tactical officer asked, voice full of disbelief. "I'm seeing it, but I don't understand it," Vellani replied. "They're treating their ships like ammunition, their crews like they're already dead." Another human cruiser slammed into a swarm processing facility, its crew evacuating in fighters that immediately began attacking other targets. It was organized madness, chaos, with a purpose that somehow worked. "Sir, their casualty rates should be catastrophic, but they're achieving objectives no other species has managed." Vellani watched as human ships continued their impossible assault, never repeating the same tactic twice. "Send this message to the fleet archive," he said quietly. "Today we learned what it means when humans decide something must die." The silence that followed the last swarm explosion was almost more terrifying than the battle itself. For 22 straight hours, space had been filled with weapons fire, screaming metal, and the constant chatter of tactical communications. Now, there was nothing but the quiet hum of damaged life support systems and the distant crackle of debris. Fields cooling in space. Admiral Jimin tried to sit up in the medical bay and immediately regretted it. Medical Officer Sulji pushed him back down onto the stretcher, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline of emergency surgery. "Admiral, you have 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and burns across half your back," she said firmly. "You're not getting up anytime soon." "Status report," he insisted, wincing as she adjusted his bandages. Lieutenant Felix limped into the medical bay, his left arm in a sling and soot covering his uniform. "Sir, I've got preliminary numbers. They're significant." Jimin closed his eyes, preparing for the worst. "How bad?" 87 ships total loss. 43 more, with critical damage. "We're looking at just over 13,000 casualties, with about 4,000 confirmed Kia." The numbers hit like physical blows. 13,000 families would get notification visits. 4,000 young men and women who'd answered the call to help. Strangers would never see Earth again. The weight of command had never felt heavier. "But sir," Felix continued, his voice growing stronger, "we did it. For the first time in galactic history, a Devourer's swarm has been completely eliminated. Every single unit in this sector is destroyed." Medical Officer Sulji looked up from treating a wounded communications officer. "The Kaleri are calling it impossible. Their records go back over 1,000 years, and no one has ever stopped a swarm attack before." Admiral Jimin stared at the ceiling of the medical bay, listening to the quiet conversations of wounded crew members. Despite their injuries, despite watching their friends die, there was something in their voices he'd never heard before. Not just pride, satisfaction. They'd been asked to do the impossible, and somehow they'd done it. "Admiral," came a weak voice from across the medical bay. Captain Changbin, barely conscious after his ship's ramming attack, raised his head slightly. "Did we get them all?" "Every last one," Jimin replied. Changbin smiled and closed his eyes. "Good. Worth it then." Through the damaged walls, Jimin could hear repair crews working frantically to restore basic systems. Chief Engineer Wu Yang voice echoed through the corridors as he directed damage control teams, his usual calm replaced by urgent efficiency. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Kaleri," reported the communications officer. His voice filtered through a damaged speaker. System. Ambassador Villani's voice came through, clearly thick with emotion. "Admiral Jimin, on behalf of the Kaleri Confederation and the billions of lives you've saved, we offer our eternal gratitude. The debt we owe humanity can never be repaid." Admiral Jimin smiled, despite the pain. "No debt, Ambassador. That's what neighbors do." Outside, the stars shone peacefully over a system finally free from the shadow of extinction. The news spread across the galaxy faster than any hyperspace transmission. Within days of the battle, every major civilization knew that the impossible had happened. Humans had actually defeated a devourer swarm. Not just survived it, not just escaped it, but completely destroyed it. Ambassador Villani stood in the rebuilt Kaleri Council chambers, addressing leaders from across known space via holographic projection. His voice carried a mixture of gratitude and amazement that hadn't faded in the 3 weeks since the battle. The humans asked for nothing in return, he explained to the assembled alien dignitaries. No territory, no resources, no political concessions. They simply heard our plea for help and responded with everything they had. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The Zentoran Empire, which had ruled half the galaxy for over 2,000 years, suddenly found their military doctrine completely obsolete. The Trade Federation's carefully calculated risk assessments meant nothing when humans treated certain death as merely inconvenient. Within a week, 17 different species had formally requested human military advisors. The proud Velt hegemony, who hadn't spoken to a human diplomat in 3 centuries, sent their highest-ranking ambassadors to Earth with gifts and formal apologies for past slights. "They're calling us the Death Worlders now," reported Lieutenant Jengin, scrolling through intercepted diplomatic communications on his tablet. "Apparently, other species think only a planet full of crazy people would fight the way we do." Admiral Jimin chuckled from his hospital bed aboard the medical ship Mercy. His ribs were healing nicely, but Medical Officer Sulji had threatened to tie him down if he tried to return to duty too early. "What else are they saying?" "The hegemony wants to hire us as bodyguards. The Trade Federation is offering exclusive contracts for human security forces. And get this, the Zentoran Empire is asking for combat training sessions." "Combat training? They want to learn how to fight like humans, sir." "Apparently, our chaotic warfare doctrine is being studied at military academies across the galaxy." Admiral Jimin looked out the medical bay window at the bustling Kalari shipyards. Human engineers worked side by side with alien technicians, sharing knowledge and rebuilding what the swarm had destroyed. It was the kind of cooperation that politicians had talked about for generations but never achieved. "Sir, I've been reviewing the intelligence reports," Jengin continued, his tone growing serious. "We've confirmed swarm hives in 47 other star systems. Some of them are already attacking inhabited worlds." The Admiral studied the star charts on his tablet, each red marker representing billions of potential victims. Other species had learned to live with the swarm threat, to evacuate and retreat when it appeared. But humans had proven something different was possible. "What are your orders, sir?" Admiral Jimin looked at the stars, thinking about the desperate Messages that were probably already being transmitted from distant worlds under attack. Somewhere out there, other species were facing extinction while their neighbors offered empty words of sympathy. "Contact Admiral Wu Yong and Admiral Sana," he said quietly. "Tell them to prep the reserve fleets for deep space deployment." "All of them, sir? Every ship we can spare. We have work to finish." The galaxy was finally learning what it meant when humans said they'd help.